her enthusiastic response to that intense, kinkier sex awoke in him his shadow. The beast has awakened, and he wasn't aware that the beast was there in him. It's like remembering for the first time that you are actually an animal. Whoops. I thought we were these higher beings. No, you like hurting a woman as you're fucking her.
Our question today comes from Andy. He's only been with 2 people in his life. The first was in a very Christian and very vanilla context. Currently, he is with a very liberal woman who has rocked his world. She's kinky and once said to him, "Hurt my pussy, daddy." And ever since hearing that, it's all he's been able to think about. It not only thrills him, but it makes him feel insanely close to her. They're in love with each other, and he can't make sense of the fact that the more he loves her, the more he wants to hurt her and use her roughly.
This guy sounds very young. He comes off sounding young. Now, he may not be chronologically young, but sexually young. And I think that, again, comes from the conservative upbringing, experience, etc. I think that her consent to that, her enthusiastic response to that intense, kinkier sex, awoke in him his shadow. The beast has awakened, and he wasn't aware that the beast was there in him. And that's an interesting thing, is I think when you're raised in a very sort of vanilla, sex should be lovemaking for procreation and whatever, then you suddenly find you have a beast inside you and you're like, whoa, like I was not expecting that. And again, I think this is an issue with some forms of Christianity and a lot of forms of religion or spirituality, is the notion that the shadow should be rejected, should be avoided and denied, and should be refocused only on sweetness and light. And then what do you do when the beast gets awakened? Because you've been denying to yourself that it was there. And so, yeah, this was clearly an awakening experience for him in a very powerful way. And I suspect it will continue to be even more powerful as time goes on. And I'm happy for him in that regard. I think the main thing that he can do is to really learn to speak openly about it and negotiate honestly with his partner so that he doesn't end up hurting her in a way that she's not okay with, because he's not admitting the presence of the beast. And so I think he's on his way. I think his asking the question indicates that he is at least examining it in the open, which is a great step. And hopefully he can let go of that conflict. And it will require a bit of updating to his belief set, though. His belief set has said this is bad, and he's going to have to update that to avoid the conflict, to say, no, actually, anything that's negotiated in good faith, that's consented to freely with a safe word and with safety rails in place so that things don't genuinely cause problems, that is good. It is good to incorporate this part of myself in a joyful and loving relationship.
I'm not sure if it's so much an updating of the belief set as much as it is reconciling his impulses with the beliefs he already has. He also needs to come to terms with the fact that this is behavior that is not necessarily immoral. He can continue to be a Christian. He didn't mention in his question whether he stopped becoming a Christian or anything, but let's suppose that he is. What would potentially happen going forward is something happens where he's like, oh, I've forgotten all about Jesus, and here I am spanking this person and doing all these dirty sexual acts. And then he has this cognitive dissonance, and then the whole thing just collapses again. And then he perhaps pines for a more Christian, the good girl in the classic sense of the word. And that's, especially when it comes from religious upbringing, that kind of reconciliation is sometimes very difficult unless you really know what you're doing and you have good, clear thoughts on why it is this is now suddenly acceptable. And not just acceptable, but it could be moral and good as well. It's one thing to say, that's just what my dirty side that I do in the bedroom. That's just something I do. We're going to put that in a box and not talk about it. We talk about integration a lot on this podcast, that he needs to integrate his old beliefs with his new predilections and have them come to harmony.
Hey all, this is Athos. If you're enjoying this content and you'd like to see more, please be sure to spank that subscribe button. It's been very naughty. And if you'd like to have your question answered on the show, please feel free to ask us by email at deeperkink@gmail.com, or Click the link in the description below to complete the form. Now, back to the show.
And that's work he has to do. I mean, his exact quote here is that he can't make sense of this. Like he's indicating the cognitive dissonance already. And here's a chance where I think I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to plug your book, especially the first section here where you talk about the Jungian psychology behind kink, and that is why it's operant at all, right? And if you actually look at it from a perspective of you're integrating a shadow of yourself in kink play through a transformational kind of an experience, then it suddenly makes a lot more sense. And this is really, we'll say, one of the things we're trying to accomplish with this podcast is to bring these topics into a more serious philosophical and psychological framework, because most of the kink content out there is just this titillating, like, he isn't this so naughty, and this very banal, superficial stuff. This is an excellent example of if this guy needs to try to figure out how to reconcile his shadow side with his Christian beliefs, there's really no good resources out there for him. But the vast majority of this stuff is, well, who cares about Christianity? Well, Jesus was wrong about all these things. So he's going to have to take one or the other. And that's just a very difficult proposition for a lot of people.
And unnecessary, right?
Unnecessary.
One way to think about the Jungian idea is, what if individuation, which is Jung's idea of integrating the shadow and becoming truly yourself, what if individuation is the moral requirement, is to be the most you that you can be? And so I have to be the most athos I can be. And that notion is that if I'm Christian, if I have that as a deep part of my belief set, then that has to be integrated with my sexuality somehow. And I also have to admit this sadistic impulse, this desire to hurt my partner and enjoy it. And that's also a part of my reality. And I have to I can't just get rid of one or the other. Christianity, maybe in public Christians would say, just get rid of that desire, deny it, suppress it. And then the kinksters will say, get rid of the Christianity. That's ridiculous.
Just pray away the shame.
Yeah. Right. And so neither public party has the right answer here, but it is to admit it, embody it, but to do so safely with guardrails, well negotiated, well consented, and then to integrate this into his being, into his self, into his conception of his total self, and realize that that's who he is, and that's great, and that's okay, and that's the moral pathway, is to truly become himself. I think the other thing that can be conflicting here is that he loves this girl, and in our modern world, we don't have much interaction with violence. And so I think this impulse toward violence can come as a shock or a surprise. It's like remembering for the first time that you are actually an animal. It's like, oh, whoops, I thought we were these higher beings of some kind. No, you like hurting people. You like hurting a woman as you're fucking her. That's something to face. And the issue is not that. The issue is the denial you've been engaging up until that moment. And so it's clear that triggered him to face this conflict, and hopefully he can find a pathway to say, yeah, you know what? I really do like that. It really is hot. It really turns me on. It really turns her on. And I do think one nice thing, you pointed this out, is that other channels, other resources focus a little too much on the props, right? Should I use a paddle to hurt her, or should I use a whip or a paddle or whatever to hurt her? Let's talk about belts. And it's like, no, that's irrelevant. The relevant thing is the psychological impulse to enjoy causing her pain. Now, she was the one who said, hurt my pussy, daddy. And so she feels the psychological impulse to feel pain. She enjoys that. And so there's a pairing there. If they can find a way to be open with their deep psychology with each other, I think they can negotiate in good faith, come to a really satisfying sex life that integrates them and uplifts both of them into the best versions of themselves through the honesty of admitting their shadows.